Red, blue, or purple? We're breaking down how the political spectrum has shifted since World War II. Obama is now sometimes called a socialist by the right wing. But what would they have called Eisenhower? Even though Harry Truman is now often cited as an example of a conservative Democrat, he was far more liberal than Democrats today in many ways. He was the first president to argue for single-payer health care. President Obama wouldn't come within miles of single-payer. In fact, he didn't even push for the public option, which is much, much weaker. Then there's President Eisenhower, the force behind the greatest expansion of Social Security ever, adding 10 million more Americans at the time. And that wasn't his only liberal warning. Here's Eisenhower on the role of government and money in expanding the military.
Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
If Obama gave that speech today on the military-industrial complex, he would be run out of town as a pinko commie. And that was Eisenhower. Liberals, led by then Attorney General Robert Kennedy and Vice President Lyndon Johnson, also gave us the historic Civil Rights Act of 1964. It mandated equal voter registration requirements and ended racial segregation in school, work, and anywhere that served the general public. We're still solidly left of center at this point. Let me go to my telestrator for the first time and wish me luck here as I do a John Madden. Let's look at our political spectrum, and let me tell you roughly where we are in that spectrum through Johnson and Kennedy. So here it is, and I would put us at about here. So yeah, we're left of center. We're not way left of center, but we're hanging in there. Now, as we continue, even Republican Richard Nixon created public agencies like the EPA and OSHA. So he's not moving that much in that respect. Of course, he was very conservative in other respects. But it was with Ronald Reagan that this nation really began our movement to the right. The so-called Reagan Revolution started tax cuts for the wealthy, and it raised military spending. But even Reagan seems progressive by today's standards, since he later raised taxes, withdrew from Lebanon, and gave illegal immigrants amnesty. And his overall policies helped give rise to the so-called conservative Democrat Bill Clinton, who moved further to the right on major public initiatives. Let's pause again to look at our political spectrum.
Responsibility starts at the top. That's what the new covenant is all about. An America where we end welfare as we know it.
All right, so when you look at the political spectrum, you know, we had the country roughly about here. Reagan certainly takes us into the red territory. And then Clinton, well, you can argue he's here, or you could argue he's here. Because, as we know from that clip that you just saw, welfare reform was ended as we know it. Republicans helped craft and endorse the bill. The result, welfare was no longer an entitlement program. It became welfare to work. The result, a huge decline in welfare benefits, down 46% from its high in the mid-70s. And the spectrum shifted even more to the right after George W. Bush took the oath of office. Following 9/11, we saw those infamous warrantless wiretaps, the denial of habeas corpus, and the use of torture on suspected terrorists, 2 wars, including the senseless invasion of Iraq, more massive tax cuts benefiting the wealthy. So at that point, let's look at our political spectrum one more time here. And we've moved way to the right here. In fact, I'll show you the movement here. And we wind up at about here. So now here comes Barack Obama, though. He was heralded by the left, except the fact is he has a mixed record. You've got a deficit commission stacked with fiscal conservatives. He escalated the war in Afghanistan with a 30,000 troop surge, gave drug companies sweetheart deals on health care reform, and refused to break up the big banks that destroyed our economy. And in classic Obama fashion, he supports gay rights, but not gay marriage. So at the end of the political spectrum, let's be kind to Obama and say he moved it a little to the left. So now it's going a little bit backwards. So we can have the green lines going a tiny bit this way. But look at where we are. We're way at the right-hand end of the spectrum. So look, with almost no one pushing us back towards the center in the last 30 years, the political spectrum has moved significantly to the right, to the point where former Republican presidents would seem unelectably liberal now. So let's talk about it. Joining us now, Linda Monk, constitutional scholar and author of The Words We Live By. Also, Claire Potter, the professor of history and American studies at Wesleyan University. I want to thank both of you for joining us. Linda, let me start with you. Have we moved significantly to the right in the political spectrum, as I just explained, or am I seeing things a little wrong?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think color commentary is definitely in your future. But I'd like to bring back, you know, Richard Nixon, who had a guaranteed minimum income for everybody. I mean, if that's not socialist, I don't know what is.
Claire, is that right? I mean, is Nixon massively liberal by today's standards on social policy?
Well, it depends how you think about it. I mean, you mentioned, for example, Nixon establishing OSHA. Mm-hmm. And OSHA, of course, was important to establish workers' rights to a safe workplace and so on. OSHA also gave the Nixon administration tremendous leverage to force business to contribute to his campaign. In 1974, it became clear during the Watergate investigations that Nixon had pressured businesses with the threat of OSHA investigations to contribute to his campaign. So something that looks very liberal on the surface looks a little more sinister when you take a closer look at it.
I hear you on that. I am not at all surprised by Nixon's intentions. But that being said, if Obama today wanted to start all of the government agencies that Nixon did, and we just had the tip of the iceberg there, wouldn't every right-winger in the country scream government takeover of everything?
Oh, you bet. But part of what has changed is the political discourse. I mean, the language in which we talk about politics, which is, of course, the buzz phrase is government interference. And that carries a lot of weight nowadays, whereas back in the Nixon administration, what that meant is school busing and desegregation. And that was pretty much it. Now it means government interference in absolutely everything.
Well, I think there was a regulatory aspect to that, too, though, Cenk. And I would say this, though, if you want to quote a lobbyist, Tony Podesta here in D.C. has said that essentially Obama is a make-work program for lobbyists, because anytime there's a proposal to regulate, as Claire pointed out, there's going to be pushback from the industry, whether it's contributions or whether it's paying the salaries of lobbyists to influence legislation.
Linda and Claire, I think you're both right on the motivations, but what we have at the end of the day is still where we are on the political spectrum and its movement. So, Linda, you know, if Eisenhower was running today, first of all, he'd be run out of the Republican Party, but I think he might be along the Dennis Kucinich lines in the Democratic Party, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I think he definitely would care about the deficit spending. I think he would care about, as you pointed out in your clip, about the political contributions that now are subsidizing the military-industrial complex and vice versa. So definitely, I think Eisenhower, who was a pragmatist when it came down to it, that was his bottom line. That's how he was able to win a world war. Wouldn't go with the strong ideology that's coming up in today's Republican Party.
And Claire, why do you think the spectrum has shifted so much? And another question is, why has the media apparently not noticed it at all?
Well, I think one of the things you have to look at is the context. A figure like Eisenhower, for example, was a politician during a period in which the Republicans and the Democrats had a horror of extremism. I think in the 15 or 20 years after World War II, there was a kind of centrist consensus that both extremes were to be avoided, and that cooperation should be the norm. Now, the only place that didn't really work is race until the Johnson administration.
Well, I think you've got McCarthy, though, coming along in the Eisenhower time, and certainly that was within the Republican Party, and that was a strong ideological bent. So I hear what you're saying about there's a concern about extremism, but certainly it had a place during the Republican Party at that time.
Sure. I mean, I don't think you're wrong about that, but I think one of the things that you see between 1948 and 1970s is a seismic shift in relation to who is a Democrat and who is a Republican. Right. So that there is an enormous liberal bloc in the Republican Party the Democratic Northern liberals are working with. Right. And that Southern Democrats, who are conservatives and can be brought along with a variety of Democratic initiatives, eventually moved to the Republican Party over desegregation and busing.
Linda and Claire, I agree with both of you. And by the end of it, you know, I remember even in my lifetime when I started out, I was a liberal Republican. No such thing exists anymore.
You and Nelson Rockefeller.
Yeah, so that's wiped off the face of the earth. And so we see how that, and part of the movement, I think, is because, and why the media didn't challenge it, is because they kept calling them the liberal media. And why do they call them that? Because during civil rights, they said, yeah, black people and white people are the same. And the conservatives at the time said, damn liberal media. And, you know, and that intimidated the media into not recognizing this trend, I think.
Well, and let's not be too celebratory of Eisenhower. He did stand up for the desegregation decisions. He did his job as president, but privately he was known for saying that racial desegregation was social disintegration. So he perhaps wasn't as progressive on the race issue as some would interpret his actions to be.
Well, that's a very fair point. We got to wrap it up right there. Linda and Claire, thank you, both of you, for joining us. Really appreciate it.